You've done everything you were supposed to do. The job, the relationship, the way you talk in meetings, the way you laugh at the right moments. You followed the script everyone handed you. So why does some part of you feel like a stranger wearing your own face? Carl Jung had an answer. It wasn't comforting. He believed most people never become themselves. Not because they're lazy, not because they're broken, because nobody ever taught them how. What if your personality is mostly a costume? Jung spent his career studying the mind, first as a close colleague of Sigmund Freud, then as his fiercest critic. The break between them happened in 1913, and it nearly destroyed Jung. For years afterward, he entered what he privately called a confrontation with the unconscious. He recorded his visions in a private journal that later became known as the Red Book. He wasn't sure in those years if he was discovering something profound or losing his mind. Maybe it was both. Out of that collapse came one of his most important ideas. He called it individuation. Individuation is not self-improvement. It's not a 5-step plan to a better you. Jung meant something stranger and harder than that. He meant the lifelong process of becoming a complete person, by facing the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life avoiding. To understand why that's so difficult, you have to understand the mask first. Jung called it the persona. It's the version of you built for other people. The competent co-worker, the easygoing friend, the reliable son or daughter. You built this mask early, probably before you were old enough to notice you were building it, and it worked. People liked the mask, they rewarded it, but a mask that works too well becomes a trap. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, writing a few decades after Jung, described something similar from a different angle. He called it the false self, a self built to meet the expectations of others, often starting in early childhood, often at the cost of ever discovering what you actually wanted underneath it. Winnicott believed this false self could become so convincing that a person might live an entire life without ever locating anything else. That's the quiet horror in both of their work. The mask doesn't feel like a mask, it feels like you. So where did the rest of you go? Jung said it didn't disappear, it went underground. He called it the shadow, and it's made of everything you decided was unacceptable about yourself. The anger you weren't allowed to show as a child, the selfishness you were taught was shameful, the desires that didn't fit the image you were building, none of it vanished. It just stopped being visible to you. Here's the part that surprises people. The shadow isn't only the bad stuff. Sometimes you bury your ambition because it made other people uncomfortable. Sometimes you bury your softness because somewhere along the way you learned it wasn't safe. Jung argued that the shadow contains whatever got rejected, whether or not it deserved to be. That means some of your most valuable qualities might be sitting in the same dark room as the ones you're ashamed of. You can't get rid of the shadow. Jung was clear about that. You can only do one of two things with it. You can keep it buried, where it quietly shapes your moods, your arguments, your blind spots, without your permission. Or you can turn around and look at it directly. That second option is most of what individuation actually is. It sounds simple when you say it that way. It isn't. Looking at your own shadow means admitting that the version of yourself you've presented to the world for years was incomplete, maybe even partly false. That's not a pleasant afternoon of reflection. Jung described it as something closer to a confrontation, the same word he used for his own collapse after the break with Freud. And here's where it gets stranger. Jung didn't think the goal was to become happier. Most people assume psychological growth means feeling more settled, more at peace, more comfortable in your own life. Jung thought individuation often does the opposite, at least at first. Becoming who you actually are tends to separate you from people who only ever knew the mask. It can mean walking away from a career that fit the persona perfectly but never fit you. It can mean feeling more alone before you feel more whole. Why would anyone choose that? Because the alternative, Jung believed, was a kind of slow disappearance. A life fully optimized for other people's approval, with the actual person underneath it never once invited to show up. There's a modern echo of this in research that has nothing to do with Jung directly. Psychologist Edward Deci and Richard Ryan spent decades studying what they called self-determination, the difference between acting from your own internal sense of who you are versus acting to satisfy outside expectations and rewards. Across dozens of studies, they found something Jung would have recognized immediately. People who lived in closer alignment with their own internal sense of self reported deeper, more durable well-being than people who were simply successful by external standards. Achievement without authenticity didn't hold up. It looked solid from the outside and felt hollow from the inside. That hollow feeling has a name now: burnout, identity exhaustion, the sense of being a stranger in your own life. But Jung was describing the architecture of it 100 years ago, long before anyone had the vocabulary for it. So what does individuation actually look like day to day? It rarely looks dramatic. Jung thought it showed up in small, almost embarrassing moments. Noticing the thing that makes you irrationally angry in other people and asking why it bothers you so much. Noticing the thing you're ashamed to admit you want and asking what would happen if you stopped hiding it. Noticing the role you always play at family gatherings and wondering just once whether you'd still play it if no one was watching. Jung called the end point of this process the self with a deliberate capital letter to separate it from the smaller, performative self most people mistake for their whole identity. He didn't think most people ever fully reached it. He thought of individuation as a direction, not a destination. Something you move toward for your entire life, never quite arriving, but becoming more whole with every honest look inward. That might sound discouraging. It isn't meant to be, because the alternative is staying exactly where most people stay, wearing the mask so long they forget it's a mask, performing a version of themselves so convincingly that the performance becomes the only self they know. Jung didn't think that was evil or weak. He thought it was simply unexamined. A life lived entirely on the surface, never once disturbed by the question of what's underneath. You've made every decision that was expected of you. Maybe that's fine. Maybe some of it really is you. But the next time something in you flinches at a feeling you weren't supposed to have, or wants something you've never let yourself say out loud, you might want to stop treating it like a malfunction. Jung would say that's not a stranger wearing your face, that's you, finally trying to get a word in.